The world knows Michael Jackson as the king of pop. What they don't know is the price he paid to wear that crown, and it wasn't paid in his 30s or 40s when the fame became too much. It was paid between the ages of 5 and 13, in rehearsal rooms, recording studios, and on stages across America. I'm about to show you exactly what was stolen from Michael Jackson during the Jackson 5 years. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at those early performances the same way again. Let's dive in. Let me paint the picture for you. August 29, 1958. Michael Joseph Jackson is born in Gary, Indiana, a small industrial town, working class, far from the glamour of Hollywood. Joe Jackson, his father, worked at a steel mill. Catherine, his mother, raised 9 children in a tiny 2-bedroom house on Jackson Street. This was supposed to be a normal childhood, but Joe Jackson had other plans. Here's where it gets interesting. In 1964, when Michael was just 6 years old, Joe discovered something. His older sons, Jackie, Tito, and Jermaine, had been secretly playing his guitar. Instead of punishing them, Joe saw an opportunity. He put together a group, added Marlon, and eventually Michael. The Jackson 5 was born. But this wasn't a casual family hobby. This was a business operation run by a man who saw his children as a way out of poverty. Joe had grown up poor. He'd tried to make it as a musician himself, with a group called the Falcons. It didn't work out. Now he had a second chance, and his sons were going to be that chance, whether they wanted it or not. Now, here's the kicker. Michael was 5 years old when the rehearsals started. 5. While other kids were learning to ride bikes, Michael was learning choreography. While other kids were watching cartoons after school, Michael was practicing vocals for hours. Joe Jackson ran rehearsals like military drills. Every step had to be perfect. Every note had to hit, and if they didn't, there were consequences. Michael later said something that really stuck with me. He said he would rehearse for 5 hours, then Joe would make them go over it again, and if Michael missed a step, if he was off by even a second, Joe would sit in a chair with a belt in his hand. Think about what that means. A 6-year-old child, trying to learn professional choreography, knowing that one mistake means physical punishment. That's not practice. That's trauma with a metronome. But that's not all. The Jackson brothers started performing at local talent shows, Gary's Gilroy Stadium, the Apollo Theater Amateur Night in Harlem. They won. Over and over, they won. Michael, the youngest, was already the star. He had something the others didn't, a voice that could break your heart, a stage presence that didn't make sense for someone so small. Audiences couldn't believe what they were seeing, and in a way, he had been born on stage. Because by the time Michael was 7, performing wasn't something he did. It was who he was. There was no separation, no off switch. Joe made sure of that. The brothers couldn't have friends over. They couldn't play sports. They couldn't do anything that might risk injury or distract from the music. Joe would tell them that other kids were playing while they were rehearsing, but one day, those other kids would be paying to see them perform. By 1968, when Michael was 10 years old, the Jackson 5 had their first major break. They auditioned for Motown Records. Berry Gordy, the founder, saw something special in them, especially in Michael. That should have been a moment of joy. Instead, it was the moment Michael's childhood officially ended. Here's what actually happened after they signed with Motown. The family moved from Gary, Indiana to Los Angeles in 1969. New city, new life, new opportunities. But for Michael, it meant no more school with kids his age. It meant no more neighborhood friends. It meant no more anything that resembled a normal life. He had tutors on set, yes, 3 hours a day, as required by California law. But the other 21 hours? Those belonged to Motown. Let me break down exactly what Michael's daily schedule looked like at age 11. Wake up at 5 a.m. for vocal warm-ups. Breakfast while reviewing choreography notes. 3 hours of tutoring, often interrupted by phone calls about scheduling. Then, straight into rehearsals. Dance practice for 2 hours with Motown's choreographers. Vocal recording sessions for 3 to 4 hours. Interview training where he was taught what to say and what never to say. Photo shoots, wardrobe fittings. And this was before they became superstars. This was just the preparation. Think about what that means for a child's development. Child psychologists will tell you that play is how children learn social skills, emotional regulation, problem solving. Michael didn't have time for play. He had a schedule. He later said that he would look out of hotel windows and see kids playing in parks, and he would cry because he couldn't join them. He was performing for thousands of people every night, but he'd never been to a sleepover. He'd never been to a birthday party that wasn't a publicity event. This is where it gets deeply personal. In October 1969, the Jackson 5 released I Want You Back. It went to #1. Michael was 11 years old. The song was about romantic longing, about wanting someone back who left you. An 11-year-old singing about adult emotions he'd never experienced. But that's what Motown needed. That's what sold records. So, Michael delivered. The success was immediate and massive. I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save, I'll Be There. 4 consecutive #1 hits in 1 year. The Jackson 5 became the biggest group in America. They appeared on Ed Sullivan. They had their own cartoon show. They were everywhere, and Michael was the star, the cute one with the big afro and the impossible voice. America fell in love with him. But here's what nobody tells you about that moment. With every hit song, the pressure increased. With every sold-out show, the rehearsals got longer. With every magazine cover, Michael became less of a child and more of a product. Joe Jackson made sure of it. He controlled everything. Where they went, who they talked to, what they said in interviews. There was no separation between Michael Jackson the person and Michael Jackson the performer. Motown pushed hard. In 1970 alone, the Jackson 5 released 2 albums and went on a massive tour. Michael was 12 years old, performing in different cities almost every night, living in hotels, being homeschooled in dressing rooms, eating room service, having his every move watched by handlers, managers, and his father. Now, here's the truth about those performances everyone loves. When you watch footage of 11-year-old Michael dancing, hitting those notes, commanding the stage, it looks like natural talent. And it was. But it was also the result of thousands of hours of forced practice. It was the result of a childhood spent in rehearsal rooms instead of playgrounds. Every spin, every slide, every perfectly timed vocal run came at the cost of something a child should have been doing instead. Let me tell you exactly what a typical Jackson 5 tour day looked like. The brothers would arrive in a city they'd never seen before and would never really see. From the airport to the hotel. From the hotel to the venue for sound check. From sound check back to the hotel to rest before the show. From the venue back to the hotel. Then wake up and do it again in another city. Michael saw America through hotel windows and stage lights. The other brothers felt the pressure too, but Michael carried the most weight. He was the lead singer, the star, the one people came to see. If the show succeeded, it was because of Michael. If anything went wrong, it was Michael who heard about it from Joe. That's an impossible burden for an adult, let alone a child. Joe made sure Michael knew it. If Michael failed, the family failed. Here's where it gets even more painful. Michael couldn't even rebel in small ways like normal kids do. He couldn't talk back, he couldn't refuse to rehearse, he couldn't say he was tired or didn't feel like singing today, because every time he even thought about it, there was Joe. Years later, Michael would say that he was so scared of his father that he would regurgitate just seeing him. Think about that. The sight of your own father makes you physically ill. But that's not all. There was another layer to this that people don't talk about enough. The emotional manipulation. Joe would tell Michael he was too fat, that his nose was too big, that he was ugly. These were things said to a child. So Michael developed a complex about his appearance that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Every insecurity, every later decision about his appearance can be traced back to those years when his father told him he wasn't good enough as he was. Let me break down what Michael lost during those Jackson 5 years that no amount of success could ever replace. He lost the ability to make friends his own age. Everyone he met either wanted something from him or was intimidated by his fame. He lost privacy. From age 11 onward, he couldn't go anywhere without being recognized, mobbed, treated like a commodity instead of a kid. He lost education. Those 3 hours of tutoring couldn't replace actual school, actual socialization, actual learning experiences with peers. He lost play. The fundamental activity of childhood, the thing that teaches you how to be human. He lost trust. When your father uses fear and violence to make you perfect, you learn that love comes with conditions. He lost innocence. Singing about adult themes, surrounded by adults, treated like an adult, but still being a child inside. And he lost choice. He didn't choose this life. It was chosen for him before he was old enough to understand what he was giving up. Here's exactly how to think about it. The world got the Jackson 5. They got I Want You Back and ABC and all those incredible performances. But Michael Jackson lost the years between 5 and 13. The years when you're supposed to figure out who you are. The years when you're supposed to make mistakes in private. The years when you're supposed to just be a kid. Michael himself talked about this later in life. In a 1993 interview with Oprah Winfrey, he said that he would see kids playing and he'd just break down and cry. He said he'd had no childhood. He'd go on to create Neverland Ranch, a place filled with amusement park rides and games, trying to give himself the childhood he never had. But you can't get those years back. You can't reverse the psychological impact of being forced to be perfect when you should have been allowed to be messy. The Jackson 5 years were from 1964 to 1975, 11 years. From age 6 to 17, the entirety of childhood and adolescence. And every single one of those years was controlled, scheduled, and monetized by adults who saw Michael as a talent to be exploited rather than a child to be protected. Here's what the press releases never mentioned. Behind every smiling photo, every energetic performance, every hit record, there was a child who had no power over his own life. A child who was physically punished for artistic imperfection. A child who carried the financial weight of his entire family. A child who was told that his value came from what he could produce, not from who he was. Michael once said that he felt like he was a money machine. A child describing himself as a machine, not a person, a machine. This is where it gets even more painful. Michael didn't just lose his childhood to rehearsals and performances. He lost it to loneliness. In his own words, he was surrounded by people all the time but had no real friends. He couldn't trust anyone because everyone wanted something. He couldn't be himself because Michael Jackson the person had been replaced by Michael Jackson the product. And that loneliness, that isolation, that fundamental disconnection from normal human experience, it stayed with him for the rest of his life. By the time Michael turned 13 in 1971, the Jackson 5 had sold millions of records. They'd had #1 hits around the world. They'd performed for audiences bigger than most adults would ever see. Michael had achieved more professional success by 13 than most people achieve in a lifetime, but he'd also missed every milestone of normal childhood. First day of school, first crush, first time staying up late with friends, all of it, gone. The Jackson 5 made Joe Jackson rich. They made Motown millions. They gave the world some of the most joyful pop music ever created. But they cost Michael Jackson something that can never be replaced. The years between 5 and 13, the years when you're supposed to learn how to be a person before the world tells you who to be. So remember those performances everyone loves. Remember little Michael spinning and singing and commanding stages like someone 3 times his age. That wasn't just talent. That was thousands of hours of forced practice. That was a childhood sacrificed on the altar of perfection. That was a little boy who wanted to play in the park, but had to rehearse instead. That was a child who learned to associate love with performance and failure with punishment. The world got the Jackson 5. Michael Jackson lost his childhood, and no number of hit records, no amount of fame, no level of success could ever give him back what was stolen in those rehearsal rooms in Gary, Indiana. Those years were gone, and with them went the chance to develop a sense of self that wasn't tied to performance. So there you have it. The painful truth about what the Jackson 5 years really cost. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.